1. My drama society at uni was made up of about 50 active members at any one time. We were a pretty social bunch, and it was common for there to be a lot of parties which the whole society would be invited to. Our story takes place at one such party, a birthday party for one of our slightly less socially adept members. This guy and his friends were what most people would picture if asked to imagine a neckbeard. A lot of long, greasy hair, bad skin, obscure anime and sci-fi gaming t-shirts, and sword collections. They were, however, some of the nicest, genuinely nice guys I knew. They were mostly shy, awkward, and inherently unthreatening. The only exception to this was Salmoneus. Salmoneus wasn't awful by any stretch of the imagination. Not at this point, anyway. But unlike the others, he was a little more outgoing, which came across as either aggressive or downright weird. For example, a friend of mine got a part Salmoneus wanted, and as a result, he messaged said friend to tell them he had put a curse on them for stealing his role. He would also actively try to flirt with the girls in this society. He wasn't aggressive or overly creepy, but just very inept. Despite this, and knowing that not many people would attend this particular party, I was happy to go and have a few drinks with these guys and 3 of my female friends, Lethea, Echo, and Hera. When we got to the party, it was, as expected, pretty quiet, and we noticed that we were the only girls present. Not a deal breaker for any of us, as we were among friends, so we started drinking and chatting to people. All the usual house party stuff. It was at this point Salmoneus comes over to us and introduces us to a new friend and the antagonist of our story, Juno, whom he had met on an online creative writing forum. Juno was not, at first glance, your typical neckbeard. He was slim, clean-shaven, and almost smartly dressed in an ill-fitting grey blazer. I would come to learn that he wore that blazer at all times. In a year of encounters, I never saw him without it. He did, however, have hair so full of gel I think I could have snapped it, a sheen of oil on his face, yellow, furry teeth, and an unmistakable odor of BO and beer. Juno insisted on shaking each of our hands by way of a proper introduction, until he got to Hera, who is a male-to-female trans woman. When Hera reached out to shake his hand, he just ignored her and focused his attention back on the rest of us, asking questions about our degrees, where we were from, etc. This was strike 1 in my book. You disrespect my friends, I will immediately think you're a dick. Anyway, the party progressed and the 4 of us girls split off from each other, talking to different groups of people. I noticed on a couple of occasions that Juno seemed to always be involved in the same conversations as Lethea, but didn't think about it too much as I had started to talk about Doctor Who, something of a favorite topic of mine, with a couple of people I hadn't met before. After a while, Juno came over and joined the conversation. He sat next to me on the sofa, a little too close for comfort, and started to try and redirect my attention towards him. I tried to involve him in the larger group, but he was persistent in talking only to me, which made me feel a little awkward. I decided to excuse myself and try and find the girls. He decided to come with me, standing as close to me as possible. I searched the whole party and couldn't find them. Juno still glued to my side like a smelly shadow. When I spoke to them the next day, I would learn that Juno had been following Lethea around the party, trying to flirt with her. She had gone into the bathroom in an attempt to get away from him, and he had followed her inside and locked the door behind them. Luckily, Echo had seen this go down and managed to open the lock. It was one of those twisty ones from the outside, at which point she and Lethea left the party immediately. At this point, I was becoming seriously uncomfortable around Juno. He was being overly flirty and making sexual jokes at my expense. I desperately looked around the party for an ally, but as I mentioned, most of the guys here were not exactly big, strong, protective types. At that point, my knight in shining armor walked into the room, in the form of Kronos. I had met Kronos a few times the previous year, and we had a lot of mutual friends. He was also pretty different to the rest of the guys in the room, as he was athletic, good-looking, and very socially adept. He's still a massive nerd, but doesn't show it quite so outwardly. I quickly made my way over to him and started up a conversation, desperately trying to signal my situation with my eyes as Juno once again came over and affixed himself to my side. Juno seemed slightly threatened by Kronos' presence, and the flirting and sexual comments stopped, which I was very grateful for. For the rest of the party, I stayed chatting with Kronos. It turned out we had a lot of interests in common, and a similar sense of humor, and just generally got along great. Juno stayed with us, occasionally interjecting his opinion or trying to change the subject to himself. At one point, he left to get another beer. During this time alone, the drinks and good chemistry with Kronos took over, and we ended up kissing. I heard a loud ahem, and we pulled apart to realize that Juno had returned and was staring at us angrily. We just laughed it off and carried on chatting. When it got to about 3 a.m., I decided I should probably go home, and Kronos offered to walk me. Juno also immediately announced that he would come with us despite living in a different area of the city. We set off walking, and Kronos started to hold my hand, which caused Juno to link his arm through mine, Wizard of Oz style, so I was walking between the two of them. It was a pretty eventful walk home for reasons unrelated to this story, but we finally got to the end of my street. At this point, I realized that I really didn't want Juno to know where I lived, so I decided to say goodbye to the boys there. Kronos cottoned on to my reasoning quickly and kissed me goodbye. Juno, however, began insisting that he would see me to my door. I declined, and managed to escape down the street to my house, although not without being pulled into a very unwanted hug by Juno. Kronos later told me that he had stood at the end of my road for a few minutes to make sure that I got home safe and unfollowed by Juno. Fortunately, this was the end of this particular encounter with Juno, although I had several more over the course of the next year. And for those of you who like a happy ending, whilst I have not had the misfortune to see Juno for several years now, Kronos and I will be celebrating our 4-year anniversary in October. 2. This was a long time ago, and looking back, all the signs were there, but this was before Neckbeard was a thing I knew about, and I was young and naive, and whilst he looked slightly creepy, I decided to give this guy a chance to be a decent human being. I was, at the time, attempting to get out of a terrible relationship. Neckbeard was kinda useful at this point, persuading me to leave him, helping me look for a nice new place to live, etc. He had the odd inappropriate comment here and there, but honestly, my self-esteem was so low at this point that I was just happy to have someone who seemed to be on my side. Anyway, fast forward a couple of months, and I'm finally out of that terrible relationship and in my own place. Neckbeard offers to come over one day and help me unpack. Seems innocent enough. Since I moved out, the odd comments have been increasing quickly, but as I say, I was young and naive, so I agree, and he comes over. We unpack for a bit and get my new place looking slightly more homely. At this point, he opens a bottle of wine. I'm slightly taken aback because who comes into someone else's house and decides to help themselves to wine? But we drink it. This now means he can't drive home, so has to stay the night. I get up early for work the next day, wake him up, and tell him he can stay for a bit until he's sure he's safe to drive, and then can let himself out. Little do I know, his idea of a bit and mine are seriously different. I get home exhausted from work at like 11 p.m. I was a chef, and it was the summer holidays in a seaside town. Working ridiculous shifts like 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. wasn't unusual. I was surprised to see him still there, but I didn't have the energy that night to kick him out, so he stayed. The next morning I got up again and told him he had to go. He said fine, he would just take a few minutes to get his stuff together. Okay, sure, so I left for work. When I came home that night, guess who was still there? Yeah, Neckbeard. This went on for a week until I finally managed to get him out. Phew. But that's not the end. By this time, I started looking to date again, and had actually started talking to the man who is still my partner. After the squatting incident, I was trying to distance myself from Neckbeard, but he didn't like this, and was guilting me into continuing to talk to him. Things got more serious with my now boyfriend, and he changed his Facebook status to in a relationship with me. This is when Neckbeard exploded. Apparently, he had dibs on me and was just being a gentleman and letting me get over my last boyfriend. I had taken advantage of his good nature and then passed him over. Like I owed him anything. He was constantly berating me with messages, so I just stopped replying, turned off my phone and went to sleep, hoping he would get the hint, but of course not. I woke up to 256 missed calls, and about 150 missed texts. I blocked him on everything, again thought this would be the end of it. Phew. But no, he started messaging my family with all sorts of outlandish claims. I owed him money, I gave him an STD, I cheated on my ex and was lying about why we broke up. Basically anything to try to get my family to talk to him, talk to me, or dislike me. After about a month of this, I had finally convinced my whole family to block him. He now had no way of contacting me, so it had to be over, right? Phew! Wrong. He still knew where I lived and sat outside my house in his car for 4 days. I assumed he left at some point, but he was always there when I left to go and return from work. He would yell at me each time I walked past and try to grab me to get me to talk to him. Luckily, he only succeeded once, and a swift kick to the balls ended that. And once I was safely behind locked doors, he would continuously ring the doorbell. After about 20 minutes, I disconnected it and went and looked through the peephole, and he was still pushing that button. I was planning on moving anyway, but about a month after that, I moved to be closer to my boyfriend and retrain. So haven't seen him since, but still every few months, I get a friend request from a new profile of his name, which I block each time. 3. So I was around 17 and didn't have many friends. I was in my last year of 6th form. I used to hang out at a game store where you can sit and play Yu-Gi-Oh!, Smash, etc., and it was quite a nice community of people from my school, and a safe place for nerds to hang out, or so I thought. I was having a really rough day, and I believe I looked tired and kinda sad, so this guy came up to me. He was 6'2", really overweight, had the neckbeard and wore a trench coat. As many of you can guess, he smelled pretty bad too, but I thought it was rude to point it out. At the time, I lived on coffee, Monster, and rarely ate, as I was going through a lot at the time with sofa surfing, being kicked out, and dealing with some health issues. I think he noticed I looked down and offered to buy me a coffee since he was getting one himself. I hesitantly accepted, as he looked a lot older than me, he was 36, but I really needed the caffeine. We started having a chat, and he seemed like the only adult I could speak to, so in a way, I guess he took advantage of my vulnerability. I told him about what was going on, and he gave me a hug. Nothing so terrible so far, and we had a few similar interests, so I gave him my Insta. He spam commented on my pictures and put some stuff like totally not thinking dirty thoughts, which threw me off. Out of curiosity, I looked at his profile, and it was videos of him talking about how women are thoughts and gamers rise up. He DM'd me on meeting up in my hometown after work, but to get by, I had to work really late hours, so I apologized, saying how I was really busy. Days after, he showed up to the game shop with a small box, and he handed it over. I looked inside, and it was a gold necklace with my name engraved on it. I was shocked on how extravagant his gift was, as I wasn't used to people buying stuff for me, as it felt like I owed him something. I gave him a hug to say I was so thankful, and he started to get a little touchy-feely and ended up tickling me a lot, despite me telling him to stop. I never told him where I worked or what I even did, but the weekend after, whilst I was cleaning tables, I found him sitting there staring at me. I came over and said hi, but he claimed that the shop owner told him where I worked, which freaked me out a little. He asked to hang out on my break, but my excuse was my break is only 10 minutes and I have stuff to do. I finished really late, 2 a.m., and I found him standing outside the pub brandishing a katana. I didn't know if it was fake or not, and I was about to call security, but he was asking if I'm enjoying my necklace, and I felt pretty bad, and he offered to walk me home. I politely declined, and I called a taxi as my friend's house where I was staying was nearby. Apart from him coming into the shop and me ghosting his DMs, we didn't really talk for several weeks, and I ended up having a boyfriend at the time, Quinn. Since I was squatting at his house at the time with some of his friends, I didn't really come into the game shop as much. I told Quinn about the whole ordeal with Philip, and I was told it was better if I blocked him. Fast forward to midnight at Quinn's place, I heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was one of his friends, I put on a dressing gown and unlocked it. To my horror, it was Philip. I have no idea how he found the address or got there, but there was nothing but anger in his eyes and roses in his hands. I immediately slammed and locked the door and called 999. The people at the game shop found out, and he was banned from ever going near there. 4. This is the story of a time I dated a neckbeard and mama's boy. Yeah, it's gonna get interesting. Let me introduce you to the characters. Me, little as school. Neckbeard, gravedigger. Neckbeard's mother, Nancy. I met Gravedigger back in November on Tinder. Obviously, we matched right away. Now, I'm not the prettiest ghoul in the world, so I try not to pass judgment on less attractive people. Gravedigger wasn't your typical neckbeard. Yeah, he had a bit of a belly, but he was mostly healthy. He showered every day and used deodorant. The only reason he classified as a neckbeard is because he had a patchy beard on his lower jaw and neck. He wore a fedora to our first date. He also likes the same things your typical neckbeard would like, but besides all that, Gravedigger seemed like a lovely man. This story takes place in January, after I formally met his mom and stepdad. We went out for the afternoon for a date, going for coffee and seeing the ice sculptures. It was winter in Canada, so we tried to stay inside as much as we could. His mom had invited me over for dinner since the first time I met her was over the holidays, and she never got to sit down with me one-on-one. Nancy was sweet to me the entire dinner. She seemed to approve of me. I was worried because I'm an alternative girl with tattoos and facial piercings, and at the time bright green hair, whereas she was very conservative. She didn't believe in sex before marriage. She had pictures of Jesus all around her house, and her kids were plain looking against their will. His sister wanted to dye her hair a funky color, but Nancy refused to allow it. His sister is an adult. Nancy asked me your typical questions when you're trying to get to know your child's boyfriend or girlfriend. Did you enjoy the holidays? What did you do? Did you see family? Do you have siblings, nieces, nephews? Do you go to work or school? It was all fine and dandy until she asked me what I did for work. Now, I'm open with people about where I work and what I do, but for a very good reason this was off-putting for me. See, I work in an adult novelty store. We also do events and demonstrations at alternative bars and clubs. The store is geared more toward alternative lifestyles instead of your run-of-the-mill toys and accessories. But I sucked it up and told her the truth. I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to tell her the whole truth. I told her I worked at an alternative lifestyle store where we have everything you'd need for a scene. She was shocked into silence. Gravedigger's sister was curious to learn more about my job and if I took it seriously. I obviously told her I did. You have to when it comes to things like this. It's all fun and games until someone gets non-consensually hurt. Now let me preface something before going ahead in this story. Gravedigger was a virgin. He was pushing 30 and had never messed around with someone before. He's never even kissed a girl before me. But he was one ready boy. He had things he was into and wanted to try with me, but I told him to educate himself on those things before we tried them. So in short, Gravedigger was one kinky virgin. Now, I'm not saying being a virgin is bad. I personally don't believe in virginity, but to each their own. Now back to the story. Not long after that, I went home. Gravedigger and I talked the entire time it took me to get home. I was on the bus. He said his mom was still shocked and quiet. When I got home, I had a shower and went to bed since it was late. Usually, Gravedigger messages me in the morning before I get up, but that morning I got nothing. I just thought he decided to sleep in, so I shot him a good morning message instead. I thought it was odd that for the entire day I didn't hear anything from him, until that evening Gravedigger messages me. I don't have the messages anymore, but the conversation went like this. I have something to tell you, but you gotta promise me you won't be mad. Okay. No, promise me you won't be mad. Okay, I promise I won't be mad. What is it? Last night when you left, my mom had more questions about you. Alright, what does she want to know?
Well, you don't have to answer them.
What does she want to know?
She wanted to know about your sex life. Like, she asked how many partners you've had, if it's only been guys or if you've been with girls too. She wanted to know about your likes and stuff.
I didn't know what to feel. I was furious and embarrassed all at the same time. This woman asked questions about me she didn't even need to know. I'm open and honest with the person I'm dating, but not their entire family. They don't need to know those things. But wait, it gets better. That's none of her business to know.
Yeah, about that?
What did you do?
I answered her questions.
Why? Why would you do that?
She wanted to know.
So you just told her? What did you even tell her?
I told her everything.
Yeah, that's right. You told her everything about me and my private life. I felt so violated. I ended up calling him to chew him out about it. I guess his mom was there when I was doing that, and she took the phone away from him. She was downright cruel to me. She called me everything from a slut and whore to a degenerate. She said I'd poison her son into having sex before marriage and get him into that lifestyle. I practically begged Gravedigger to stand up to his mother, but he was quiet as his mom was tearing into me. Gravedigger said his mom had the right to know these things about me, but I'm guessing deep down he knows she doesn't, since he asked me not to be mad at him when he told me. He even sided with his mom. He said he wasn't into the same things I was until he met me. I told him where to find his balls in his mother's purse and blocked them. Let's just say that was the end of that relationship. 5. So Amy is a nanny. She would have been around 24 at the time of this story. Kevin was 19. She had not long left a family with a 6-year-old boy and 4-year-old girl. They were lovely people and treated Amy like family, but the mother had decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mother after her youngest boy was born, so a nanny became unnecessary in their case. Important note here that Amy left because she wasn't required anymore. She hadn't gotten into trouble or anything. Anywho, Amy found another job. She would be taking care of a 5-year-old boy, Jake. Jake had an older brother, Kevin, who was already a full-on neckbeard by the time Amy started working for the family. His mother, Sandra, told Amy that he probably wouldn't speak to her much and would pretty much just stay in his room. Amy understood this. She still felt bad in case Kevin felt left out, but she couldn't really do much as he was essentially an adult and could do what he wanted. Sandra was right for the first week or two. Amy didn't see Kevin. He would wait until she was out to grab food and would spend most of his time playing video games or watching anime. He dropped out of college a couple of months prior. This continued until Kevin actually saw Amy in person. Amy was half Korean, her father's side, and this seemed to make her interesting to Kevin. She told me that the first time he spoke to her, he called her kawaii, which is, of course, a Japanese word. She had been a little flustered, but explained to him that she was not Japanese and that her father was actually Korean. He just nodded at this, stared at her for a few seconds, then retreated back to his room. Any normal person would have apologized and not brought it up again, but Kevin just didn't know when to quit. He would constantly use Japanese phrases to compliment her, hang around her all the time, followed her whenever she took Jake out, and seemed almost jealous that his little brother was getting all the attention. She was once making a fruit salad snack for Jake. She made it into a smiley face, as Jake was going through a phase of not wanting to eat fruit or vegetables. He stood by her side and watched her make it, then commented on how she was such a good little waifu. I had to look that up and, well, okay. This made her uncomfortable, and she told him as much, but it didn't stop him. She once arranged a playdate for Jake and the kids I was looking after, 3 and 6-year-old boys and a 5-year-old girl. They were around the same age, had similar interests, and both families were cool with it. She told me it was partly to try and scare Kevin off. Yeah, thanks, Amy. I have a general goth vibe, tattoos and piercings, but I'm pretty short and wouldn't say I have any muscles. Hardly that intimidating. Amy seemed to think it was enough, though. We played at the park with the little ones for a bit, and as expected, Kevin decided to show up. He was pretty cocky and practically ordered me to move from the bench so he could sit beside Amy. By this point, I had a fussy 3-year-old sat on my lap eating his lunch, and a 5-year-old standing behind me trying to braid my hair. I couldn't move if I wanted to. I told him as much, and he huffed, standing beside Amy instead. She looked visibly uncomfortable, but she stuck it out. When he saw that he wasn't getting a reaction, he left, clearly not happy. That was the one and only time I had the pleasure of meeting Kevin, but the memory of his pissed-off face and the smell will stay in my mind forever. I later found out that he tried to get Amy into trouble for meeting up with her boyfriend. Sandra knew this was a lie, as we'd met several times before, and she knew that Amy was happily single, and that my boyfriend and I were happy together. He was pissed at her for a little while after, but he eventually let his creepy feelings get the best of him. He went back to his usual self, following Amy around and being a creep. He even told her of the sorts of hentai he watched. Again, I had to Google that. I'm gonna go throw up now. And how he really liked this one, and he'd go into detail about it was a nanny seducing a teen, and no, it was not consensual. Amy looked it up. This really creeped her out, and she went out of her way to avoid him. The last straw was when he walked past her in the kitchen one day when she was making Jake's lunch and slapped her butt. She flipped with him. All the anger that she had towards him came out in a rant, and once she was done, she packed up Jake's lunch and took him to the park for a while to calm down. She informed Sandra, who also flipped out at Kevin. She even threatened to kick him out. Amy did go to the police, though they were not too helpful. They gave Kevin a warning and said if he did it again, he could possibly get convicted or at the very least fined. I don't know if that's what normally happens, I'm not a lawyer, but it pissed both me and Amy off that he didn't get punished for it. Amy stayed on for another month while she looked for somewhere else. Sandra understood. She later found out that Sandra had made Kevin get a job, but he only kept it for a few months as he couldn't be bothered getting up early. Last she heard, Kevin had been kicked out and was living on benefits. We never found out if he changed or not, but let's be real, probably not. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Neckbeards in the Wild, number 50. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I wonder what that idiot in story number 2 was actually expecting to happen. I mean, was she just going to forget that he'd sneakily try to move in? Okay, when's this go up? This goes up on Sunday. Okay, if I didn't do a stream on Saturday, I will do one on Sunday night. But probably a gaming stream on Saturday, maybe a bit more No Man's Sky again. Unless people are bored with that, but I don't really think the game I'm playing matters, does it? It's more about having an opportunity to chit-chat with people. When the chat works properly. I was streaming the other night, and, that's actually another issue with that I wanted to bring up. When I was streaming the other night, the chat had just stopped. I thought, that's a little disappointing when that happens, but, sometimes people are just, they've got the stream on, but they're away doing other things. Yeah, it turns out people were chatting, it just wasn't updating for me. It was only when I popped the chat out and it was forced to refresh, I saw all the messages I'd missed, so that was annoying. There's also another issue I've noticed. When I'm streaming, people sometimes make super chats. That's like a donation basically to me. And some goes to YouTube, some goes to me. And I know people are being charged for it, but so far I haven't gotten anything from the donations made on Saturday. I'm recording this on the 12th. Anything made on the 8th. Right? Initially I thought, well, maybe it was technically into Sunday when I started doing it, but even so, in the past when I've done streams that went on to 2 or 3 in the morning, technically it's still Saturday in America, so that seems to be when it gets credited to my account. It gets credited for the Saturday, and it still hasn't been credited to my account, so the money's been taken from the people who donated. It's not been credited to me in any way. There's no indication of it. I do delete my streams when they're done because I like people to catch them live. I don't archive them. But it's never been a problem in the past with the actual revenues showing up. So, I was wondering if anyone else had that issue. Anyway, I found one other person, actually. I had to run it through Google Translate, because this person was a French YouTuber, but they apparently had the same problem on the same date. So I'm wondering how many other people were actually dealing with that. Okay, anyway, with that little grumble, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.